So we may respectfully agree to disagree here, but yes. And let me tell you why I think both are examples of smart growth development. Ho'opili, 2 miles of that development is along the rail route. And to fully direct growth along the entire rail corridor, you have to build in both places where development exists and in places that are open space. And government officials many years ago said, we're going to direct growth to Kapolei and to Ewa. And so Ho'opili, at least to me, because it is close to a rail station, and because a lot of the mix of what they're planning to build is going to be dense, that it does qualify to me as a smart growth development. And I would go one step further and say Kohler Ridge is about 2 miles away from a rail station, and you have to connect up that community, maybe through like a bus rapid transit one day to rail. But that also to me is an example of that. But let me go to the heart of the question that's raised by projects like Ho'opili. Ho'opili is being built on prime ag land, about 1,700 acres, I think, if I'm not incorrect. And there's a bigger question that we should be asking ourselves, and unions and the construction industry should be a part of this. What do we really need to do to truly be more ag sustainable in Hawaii? What does that mean? Land use is certainly one part of it, but are we going to invest in the infrastructure that it takes to really make ag work? Are we going to give the people who are in ag the resources to market that to local customers? What do we do about the cost differential? Because labor costs in Hawaii is going to be higher than in third world countries where a lot of our produce is imported from. What do we do about the GMO question? Is it something that we want to support and thus bring more in, or is it something that our community says this is not appropriate for us? That's the real question. I think sometimes we default to these extremes versus really trying to grapple with an issue that is more complex than a platitude saying we should or we shouldn't. And our industry is just as guilty as that. So, and that's where you can come in, right? That's, facilitating this conversation and not going into into this conversation so fixed with your position that you won't be open to reason, right, and logic. And again, that goes for both sides. So I think your question speaks to a bigger issue that's out there. And we can agree to disagree on a specific project, but I think we can all agree that we want to build a sustainable Hawaii. And we have different perspectives, like Senator Akaka mentioned earlier. How do we bridge the gap and do it with aloha? That's the real question.
I don't want to echo what John White has said already, but more talking about, big controversy with Kohler Ridge and Ho'opili was the loss of prime land. But for those of you who have followed this issue, I represent Central Oahu North Shore. And I can tell you there is an abundance of ag land available, but nobody's willing to take it on. It's a huge responsibility. A lot of it is a lack of infrastructure. A lot of the land is in private ownership. And I think some of the difficulties faced by those who seek to go into agriculture, because to me, it is an opportunity for us to really develop a viable industry. But it takes negotiating additional long-term allowances for those who seek to farm. Right now, the private landowners are very reluctant to do it. I think part of it is creating some flexibility in government to provide workforce housing, because I'm sure all of us can make this assertion that our families grew up in the plantation. That's how my family came to Hawaii. But all of these plantation camps, that's what made it successful. The workforce was right there. That's allowed, ag to develop to the levels that at that time was the primary driving force for our economy. I think we, for those of us in elected office, I think we need to move back on it and create those type of opportunities, because every farmer will tell me, I would love to take on more land, but it's really hard for me to recruit workers to work and not be able to provide them a place to live. So there's opportunities. I don't foresee Ho'opili and Coral Ridge as a loss of that opportunity. With respect to what they provide, these were projects that were planned. Most of them were planned 15, 20 years ago. But that's part of the problem. I think John White pointed out, the process that it takes a developer to even get to the level of breaking ground takes so long. To go back and revisit something that already was contemplated, that was decided upon back when I see Governor Ariyoshi here, probably during his time in office, it really, we're not helping ourselves. So that's just my perspective.
I guess I'll be a little more controversial in my answer, and I'll say maybe a practical answer is that in a vacuum, I would say that perhaps Ho'opili and Coral Ridge shouldn't be built, but I know not what's practical. It is, Ernie said, these projects have been planned years ago. The rail is already set. So given today's environment with the rail line already there, the planning already in progress, the general plan has a growth out that way. That's what we have. That's what it is. So in that perspective, I'll say it does make sense. It is what it is. But again, if we all got involved maybe 10 years ago, maybe we would have changed this. And that's really my message to you. Get involved now, because once the decision, it's too late. It's great to say we shouldn't do this, don't do this, lobby against it, but decisions have already been made.
Any other questions? We'll take maybe 2 or 3 other questions, because I know we have our next panel, and our guests are on their way. And some of them are here.
Hi, Brent McConnell. What's the general, or for a project like rail, what's like the general obligation to revenue bond debt structure like? And in terms of projecting out what current property tax intake is versus forward projected numbers?
Well, I think if you understand the real project, you could ask Stanley Chang, he read on that table. But what makes Honolulu's project unique is that it's considered a cash project, right? We have the federal funds that provided through the full funding grant agreement. Now with the GET extension surcharge, if that was to be signed into law by the governor and favorably reviewed by the city council, then the project pays for itself. It would be considered a debt-free project when it's completed. I think the debate now focuses on the operation and maintenance. How is that going to be addressed? I think that's the big elephant in the room, so to speak. But I think from those who are entrusted with that responsibility, there's still some level of discussion that needs to occur in terms of the fare box recovery ratio, and then the financing of the project itself beyond that. I think there was efforts at the most recent legislature, perhaps Senator Harimoto can speak on this, to expand the GET surcharge to allow for operation and maintenance costs to be absorbed by the GET surcharge, since it's already in place. That the argument that were made, or the assertion was made, is that it would also impose some of that cost on our tourist population to absorb, to finance the operation and maintenance. So with regards to the actual capital costs, it's a cash-free project. All cash project, considered all cash. At the end of the day, when the construction is completed, provided there's no more overruns, that's the key. That we are crossing our fingers that there's no more cost overruns, that it will be debt-free once it's fully constructed.
Any other questions? So.
The state study that DBED did this year said we only need about 25,000 new homes for the next 10 years over all of Oahu. We've already zoned because of rail, 75,000 plus. new homes. And I'm just sort of curious how, we're thinking about, what are your thoughts on all this new TOD stuff that you're talking about to develop with rail? Are we talking about, it seems more than this 3 times what we need scenario?
Sure, let me start with that. So the time horizon for transit-oriented developments will be decades, not necessarily years. You'll have to build a rail system first, and different communities are going to develop and grow at different speeds depending on the marketplace. Now I don't know if it's high as 75,000, it may very well be, but it is true that a substantial number of homes have been authorized through zoning. And housing development goes in cycles, right? And a lot of it's dictated by the credit markets, so and the economy. So what you'll see is you'll see a lot of housing built, and then you'll see the economy fall, and then you'll see for a number of years not many homes built, and then you'll see a ramp up. It's very cyclical. It goes like this. And so our community will develop at different speeds. But maybe I could frame this in a slightly different way. Rail should not just be about transportation and development in terms of housing and just development in general. There's a bigger question to ask. We're about to make the most significant public investment in the history of our state. $5.5 billion, maybe a bit more when the whole tab is in. And so the question is, what are we going to get from that investment? And we will only get the best out of that investment if we are purposeful and we have a vision of what we want to get out of it. There are communities along the rail route that are some of the more impoverished communities in the state. How do they benefit from it? Without pushing the population out in a way that's appropriate. How do we bring services and jobs? How do we use rail as a catalyst to create another spur to our economy that right now we're being led by a tourist-based economy, which probably only has so much more to grow, if that. How do we use rail to create a better quality of life? There are many people who will use rail to go to work and use it for other services. How do we create alternatives? And how do we build not just homes, not just skyscrapers in the sky and walls of concrete, but how do we create walkable places that you're proud of, that have places to gather, that have great sidewalks, that truly connects bikes and the bus and all the different ways that we get around, and eventually the rideshare programs like Uber, which I think is a very critical component to it. So if we limit ourselves just to one aspect of it, I think we're missing the bigger picture. And smart growth encompasses all those different things. It's really about what kind of community do we want to make for ourselves, and how do we use what we've got to make sure everyone benefits, and not just the privileged few. And that takes all of us as leaders coming together.
Take these last 2 questions.
You mentioned raising taxes to fund the development. I guess I'm a little concerned because it almost sounds like it's to come off the backs of the taxpayers or from the tourists that you mentioned about raising on tourism. It seems like we're giving more and more tax credits to corporations. Some of these corporations are coming in and taking prime ag land and using it not for anything that provides us sustainable food, but is just used for testing. Is there a way that we can look to taxing these corporations so that they can actually provide the revenues that we need to get housing in here and have that more sustainable lifestyle, rather than keep giving us tax incentives?
Well, I'm not an elected official, so I could probably be a little bolder in my answer. Yes, I think those who make profits in Hawaii have a responsibility to help make this community a better place. I would not oppose looking at ways to raise taxes amongst people who can afford it. But here's the trick, right? It's not just doing it because we can. It's making the case that we're asking you to pay more, but what you get out of it in the long run is a stronger economy. You get a better a well-trained workforce. You get a quality of life that makes us competitive as a region across the world, right? There are some advantages that we have in Hawaii that no other place has. And how do we leverage that so that we have a sustainable economy where people don't have to move away for great jobs, but they can stay here because we provided that. We should not be putting the burden on those who can least afford it, but there are some things we have to do right now, which is why we support the GET tax exemption going forward, to finish this one piece that's going to be critical. There are many different other things that we can do. It's not just raising taxes. It's financing tools. It's public-private partnerships. It's leveraging what we've got right now in resources. We have to be smart about it, right? And we have to take courage because even a tax increase amongst wealthy businesses or wealthy landowners comes with controversy and risk because many times they're the ones who are contributing to people who get elected. But if you come together as a community, and if we come together as activists, and we bring the community with us, then we provide the cover and the support that our elected officials need to make those decisions.
I'll be real brief, but I am an elected official, and actually I share John's perspective on this issue. The county itself does not give tax credits, but what we do is provide exemptions for developers as they develop their project, to make the numbers work, so to speak. So, that's in a way a tax credit, so to speak, but we don't provide a tax credit directly. But there are ways, and I do favor asking developers as they proceed with their project. What we usually label it is what we call impact fees, to provide that level of investment to those who may not directly benefit from their project. Classic example, most recently, and I'll end with this. We had a developer recently come in for a city project for zoning approval. It went through the administration, came to the council. Through the zoning committee, the chairman was able to negotiate more affordable rental units dedicated for a population that were below 60% median income, which is one of the hardest for us to serve. Very successful. The developer objected, but that's, the council had the foresight to make that recommendation. In addition, there was another project that came through, similar project, affordable rental project. He's talking about the issue of homelessness. One of the most successful endeavors in serving that population is the whole housing first philosophy. That project came through, was going to develop affordable housing. In exchange for an exemption from the city and county, I brought the developer in and asked him to dedicate no less than 12 units for the housing first model. And he was more than willing to do it. Because at the end of the day, that developer also saw his obligation to ensure that this particular issue be remedied at some point. So there are ways we can do it, but I think going forward, it really takes foresight and political courage. Because oftentimes, I think the perception amongst the general public is those of us in elected office, we just rubber stamp what comes before us, but that's not the case. And I always tell people when I go out there and speak, never believe what you see on TV, never believe what you read in the paper, because it's far more substantial than what you see. You see myself, you see Senator Harimoto on TV or even the paper. We interviewed for 20 minutes, you see a 5-second clip. And oftentimes that 5-second clip has nothing to do to the points that we were trying to articulate. And it's very frustrating, So it's a matter of getting involved, understanding the issues. But believe me, we are very concerned.
So, real quick, so when you talk about assessing fees or taxes, I just want to make a differentiation. So in the old days when we had developers like Castle and Cook developing Mililani, they're developing thousands of units. So they paid for the sewers, they paid for the water, they paid for everything. But in my presentation, I was talking about what we call infill developments in the urban core. Typically, those would be smaller scale developments. The developer in those cases really can't afford to pay for massive infrastructure costs. So that's what I was talking about. The government now needs to figure out this new model where the government has to come out and pay for the infrastructure, otherwise development won't happen. So in those kinds of cases, government needs to, you could say, front the money through taxes or whatever. But on the flip side, what is best practice across the country, if they decide to do that, they do it for a reason. And that is, when the development occurs, there's economic development with businesses, brings in more taxes, the property values go up. So this is what government gets in return on the back end. So just wanted to mention that.
And I understand that. I guess I'm thinking not so much of the developers per se taxing them, but taxing corporations like Monsanto, Pioneer, whatever, retail stores or whatever coming in, just the general corporations that are coming into our islands, looking to tax them more than the developers. So, I think that would provide more funds for you guys to build stuff.
One last question.
Oh, so then, my question was, in a sense, like, is smart, you guys kind of touched on it, is smart growth just infrastructure, or creating these denser populations that we're always going to have to feed, but we're now opening up more prime ag land, yeah? So, are we able to correlate this new prime ag land with these denser populations by helping support more local food and create more of a, is like the sustainable local food growth part of smart growth, or is it just infrastructure?
So again, if you remember my slide, smart growth was a whole bunch of things, but it was primarily, I guess in that concept, the primary focus really was making smarter use of limited land space. So how much land would you need for 100 homes versus how much land would you need for 100 apartments or condos, right, vertical? And that small space is very efficient use of limited land. And with the caveat, of course, we reserve some of that space for gathering places, greenery, open spaces. So that's kind of a roundabout answer, but I think smart growth also encompasses good use of the land in terms of sustainability. That's a big part of it too.
Now, Breene is far more kind of studied on this, but I know there's a couple of things that resonated with me. There are many, we agree with the term food desert. So places where, the population doesn't have access to good nutritional food. I think it's one thing that smart growth can address, right? How do you create opportunities for urban gardens? How do you build into buildings, rooftop gardens? How do we use the physical form that you're building in an urban environment, right, to provide for better access to food for populations there that may not benefit from that? That would be one way. The other way is not building in places that are ag land today, but that's just one part of it. I think my challenge to environmentalists and those who are supporters of becoming more ag sustainable is to not just stop at opposing projects, because that is too simplistic, right? And I'm not saying that you're doing that. Let's go one step further. What is it going to cost to build the infrastructure and acquire the land that will allow more farmers to succeed? What are we willing to pay as local consumers for produce grown locally? And what do we do if it means that it's going to cost more? How do we deal with the fact that we're competing in a global market where labor costs are much higher here than they are in third world countries, right? These issues are far more complex than just what we do with land. And I think that our industry and labor and the constituents that I represent through PRP need to be a part of that conversation. And so if we can sometimes say, we can actively oppose projects or support projects. This is my TOD research model, where we asked the Sierra Club to join us. Didn't mean that they didn't support or they didn't oppose Coal Ridge or Ho'opili, because they did. And it didn't mean we stopped supporting it. But we said we're far better off if we find where the common ground is and apply our varying strengths to create change and the things that need to happen to address it. And it's incremental, but that might be the only way we can do it really in a state like ours.
Smart growth is great, is why I